My name is Fergus McNeill. I'm Professor of Criminology and Social Work at the University of Glasgow, where I work in the Scottish Centre for Crime and Justice Research. Before that, back in the 1990s, I worked as a criminal justice social worker in the East End of Glasgow. So the first thing I want to focus on is the question of the purpose or goal of probation work. It's often said these days that the system has become preoccupied with risk, but I want to suggest that the primary objective or purpose of probation work should be reintegration, or if you like, the integration of people who have offended. The reason I want to stress that is that desistance research has led me to appreciate and understand that in the long term, we secure reductions in risk when we integrate people effectively into society. And if we leave people in a disintegrated situation, marginalized, stigmatized, and excluded from social life, then we perpetuate and sometimes even exacerbate risk. Paradoxically, therefore, if the criminal justice system focuses only on risk and seeks merely to manage and contain it by holding people in an excluded position, I think it stores up risks for the future rather than reducing them. And that's why I think the central focus of probation work and indeed of the whole penal system should be on reintegration. The second thing I want to stress is the importance of recognition of the worth and potential and dignity of all human beings in probation work. When we approach someone who has offended with that kind of recognition at the heart of our disposition towards them, we stress not the harms they have done or the things that they may be ashamed of, but rather their enduring worth as human beings and their potential to move forward into a life which is better for them and better for their communities. And in the absence of that kind of recognition, any effort to influence or change that person is likely to founder for very obvious reasons. When we feel misrecognized by others, when we feel degraded by others, the natural human reaction to that is to withdraw and perhaps to protect yourself, to put up barriers between yourself and the person who is misrecognizing you. Misrecognition feels like an assault, and in fact, sociologists call it symbolic violence. So the violence that comes when we are not recognized as we are or as we see ourselves, but rather when labels, stigmatizing labels, are attached to us in ways which diminish our status and limit our opportunities. So I think even before we get into a question about practice skills or practice approaches or programs or effective interventions, we have to get the core disposition right. And we express that disposition through recognizing people in terms of their worth, dignity, and potential. The third thing I want to stress is the importance of dialogue in probation work. When we get into discussions about effective practice, it can quickly become technical and primarily concerned with the application of principles or techniques which are said to be supported by a particular evidence base. But I think more fundamentally, if the approach that we take to rehabilitation is dialogical, then that rests on the kind of recognition of worth and potential that I've already mentioned. And it contrasts with monologues or lectures. And again, if you put yourself in the position of somebody on probation, if they feel, or if you were to feel, that your probation officer merely lectured you and told you how to think, what to do, and what not to do, your likely reaction to that kind of practice would be defensive. And again, I think that's a natural human reaction. Conversely, if practice is rooted in recognition of worth and potential, then it must proceed through a dialogue which invites people into a conversation about themselves, their behaviour, but also their future. And future-focused dialogue, I think, is particularly important if we want to find ways to support desistance. So I guess to sum it all up, we should aim at reintegration. We should start with recognition of worth and potential, and we should work through methods that are primarily dialogical rather than monological.